Hello, thank you for joining Excel Virtually Global, and thank you for joining my session, which is about Power BI data flows. Very happy to be with you here. This is a pre-recorded session. Of course, you watched the pre-recording, but I'll be available to answer any questions during the same time as well. My name is Reza. I work at Radacad. I'm a Power BI consultant and trainer. I'm author of some Power BI books. Some of them are free available. You can download it. The information about all of them are available in Radacad website. And in my career, I'll work with a lot of consultants, a lot of developers, a lot of Power BI developers and data analysts who wants to build the solutions with the data, and I normally help them in building that solution. Now, I'll go through one example situation of using Power BI data flows, and then we'll talk about how that situation can be helped. So I'll go back to my slides with that. So we are going to talk about data flows. I already explained about myself. Let's talk about a specific scenario using one table in multiple files. If you worked with Power BI, and it happens also with Excel as well, that you do some data transformation using Power Query, and then you realize that you just don't need it in one file, one Excel file, one Power BI file. You'll need it in more than one file. A very common example of that is a date table. Let's say I've been assigned a task to build a BI solution, a reporting solution for sales systems. I have a table such as sales fact table, date dimension, customer dimension, store dimension, anything that is related to the sales. And then I spend some time build it, that product dimension, for example, in that module, in that Power BI solution might be a table that I build with merging multiple tables together. Or the date dimension is something that I went and created the script and built that. Now, after a few months, I've got a new request. That this request is that go and build an inventory Power BI report. And because this is totally different, it is for different department, the access are going to be different. People who are going to see inventory analysis won't need sales, or people who are going to see sales, they won't need inventory analysis. So I'll go and create a new Power BI file. When I create a new Power BI file, there are some tables that are totally new in this, such as inventory movement in the warehouse table itself. But there are also some tables that are similar to the tables that I used before in the sales analysis, such as date dimension, such as product dimension. Now, I have normally two options. One option is to go and rebuild all of those things in the new solution, which takes a lot of time. The other option is go to copy those queries. In Power BI, you can go to Power Query Editor, and same in Excel as well, and you can copy the existing queries. You can even say Control-C, and then come and in the new file, do the Control-V. That will copy that script over here. That is easy, right? So you'll get exactly the same date dimension over here, exactly the same product table over here, as long as you have access to the same data source. However, this is not really solving the problem. This is adding another problem, because now I have the source code in two different files. If I'm building the product dimension, it is in two different files. If later on I realize that, well, I missed to add product color as a column into that table, I have to go and fix it in the sales PBIX file. And I have to remember that I also did it in the inventory. So let's go and fix it in the inventory file as well. And what if I have like 10 different Power BI files? This would be a nightmare of maintenance. Every time you add a field, every time you change something in the structure, you have to come and redo it across all of those places that has used this. Ideal solution would be reusing what you have done already without redundanting it. And that is where the data flow comes to help. So I'm going to explain what the data flow is and how it is going to help. So first of all, what is Dataflow? Dataflow is running Power Query process independent from Power BI report in the cloud and storing the results somewhere. That independent part of this definition is important because you can already run Power Query in the cloud. When you build a Power BI report, when you publish it to the service, you are actually running a Power Query in the cloud and you can schedule it. There's no problem with that. But making it independent from Power BI report means that the result of your query will not be stored in a Power BI dataset, because that is normally where it goes by default. Or if you use Power Query inside Excel, it goes into the Excel. Dataflow will push it into another destination. So you are actually getting data from your sources, you do the data transformation using Power Query engine, and then you push it into a different destination. We'll talk about that destination in a minute. The Dataflow itself uses the engine of Power Query. This means all the transformations you are using in Power Query, the beautiful graphical interface of Power Query, all of that are available, the wide range of data connectors. You can connect to any data sources, as well as advanced features such as writing custom functions or writing MScript, modifying MScript. All of that is available in Dataflow as well. Similar to what you do in Power Query in Power BI Desktop or in Power Query inside Excel. The destination of Dataflow depends on what type of Dataflow you are using. If I talk about the common type of Dataflow, which is what we are focusing here right now, called Power BI Dataflows, the destination is Azure Data Lake Storage. Azure Data Lake Storage is like a file storage that you can store whatever you want in Azure environment. You don't need to have a separate subscription for that. As part of your Power BI license, if you have a Power BI license, pro license, let's say, for example, you have like 10 gigabyte space up in the cloud. Part of that can be for your internal storage of Azure Data Lake subscription for your Dataflow. So you don't really need a separate Data Lake subscription. However, if you have your own Data Lake subscription, you can connect it to Dataflow, and that is called external Dataflows. We'll talk about that a little bit later. For now, this is important to understand that you don't need a separate subscription for that. So Dataflow gives you the ability to get data from any data sources, do the transformation, store it in a destination. What is the point of all of these? The point is that then in another Power BI file, you can get data from that Dataflow, from the result of Dataflow. So Dataflow works like a database, in fact, without paying for Azure SQL database or building a separate database. Your Dataflow is actually acting like a database as a single source of truth for your files. There are many use cases for Dataflows. I'll go through some of those and then I'll show you a demo of how Dataflow works. For example, that date example I told you about, if I have the ability to create Dataflow, then what I'll do is I'll create a Dataflow. I put the date dimension in it, I put product dimension, any dimension that is shared across multiple PBIX files, I'll create that using a Dataflow. This will process it once, I don't need to process it again for each file. And then in each file, all I do is I'll go and add or import data from that Dataflow entity. For example, get data from Dataflow's date dimension, get data from Dataflow's product dimension. The good thing about this is that first, the transformation process only happens once inside the Dataflow. Another good thing is that it is consistent, it is less redundant. My code is in one place, which is in Dataflow. If I go and change it in my PBIX files, I'll just refresh it and I get the most up-to-date structure over there. It makes maintenance much easier as well. It also makes the refresh of the solution faster. Just using Dataflow by itself doesn't make the whole process refresh faster, because still that transformations happens in the cloud. Imagine this, that I have a really heavy data transformation steps in Power BI. Whenever I hit the refresh in Power BI Desktop, it might take like 14 minutes to go through all of those processes, merge, combine, group by, aggregate, do all of those things, and then give me the result. So I have to wait for 45 minutes to continue my Power BI development. But what I can do is I can push that heavy lifting data transformations to the cloud, to the Dataflow, and then Power BI just get data from the result of that, which is already transformed. So it is just importing. The whole process of refresh is still the same, but the thing is that Power BI desktop refresh is faster. It perhaps just like few minutes. I don't need to wait for 45 minutes to be able to continue my development. Still, the whole refresh time is the same. That is not considering that if we use some specific features in Dataflow, such as enhanced compute engine, which will make the process much faster. Even just Dataflow by itself would help in faster development. Another very common scenario is that not every company, not every business have the luxury of having Azure cloud database or just even on-premises database. They might not have anything set up. So with the Dataflow, you can actually build that kind of storage. It won't be really like a data warehouse. It won't be like Azure Synapse. It won't be like Azure SQL Data Warehouse or anything like that. But at least it's a place for your dimensional model. You can have your fact tables, dimension tables, all designed as your Dataflow entities. It might be loaded with one Dataflow or multiple Dataflows. And then Power BI can get data from there. Not only Power BI, but other applications can also get data from there. So let's see an example of a Dataflow. Here I have my Power BI account. First thing you need to know is that Dataflow is a Power BI website only feature at the moment. There is no way to create that in Power BI Desktop or in Excel, but you can leverage what you have done in Power Query in Power BI Desktop or Excel and copy and paste it and build the Dataflow. But the object itself should be created inside Power BI website. You need to be in a workspace, newer edition of the workspace, of course, version 2 of workspace. Then you can go ahead and create a Dataflow. Creation of a Dataflow can be just like that. When you create a Dataflow, there are multiple ways of creating it. Let's say I just keep it simple for now. I want to define new tables. When I click on that, it brings up the Power Query editor environment for me. This is similar to Power Query in Power BI Desktop or Power Query inside Excel, where I'll see all different data sources and I can choose which data source I want to get data from. I can choose, for example, getting data from SQL Server and enter the information for that. I can choose getting data from an Excel file and start entering the information for that. In this case, I'm going to get data from my OneDrive for Business. But you can also get data from on-premises data sources using the on-premises gateway as well. So let's say I go and find the data sources. I have a data source here, for example, for AdventureWorks. Here it is. I'll select that. The rest is similar to Power Query inside Power BI, Desktop, or Excel. When I continue, I'll see the navigator window, which shows me all the sheets or tables, entities that I have inside that Excel file. I'll go ahead and select some of these. Let's say, for example, I select product category, product subcategory. It shows me a preview of data here as well. And then when I say transform data, this will bring that inside Power Query Editor. Now, the Power Query Editor in here has some advantages at the moment compared to Power BI Desktop or the Power Query inside Excel. And one of those advantages is this diagram view of the steps. You can see for each of these queries, I have something like a diagram showing that where this query is coming from. It is coming from Excel. We navigated to that specific sheet in Excel. The first row assigned as a header, automatic change data type happened, which is basically the same number of steps we have here, but it presented in a much more beautiful way. And it is also available for those as well. If you want to add more steps, you can even go ahead and do it from there. Depends on the size of data. This might take quite a while if you want to process it, or it might be just fast. The preview of records here normally is about 100 records. Let's say, for example, I want to do some transformations. I want to build a product table which has category and subcategory in it as well, product dimension. I'm interested in product key. product subcategory key, English product name, and that's pretty much it from this table. I'll remove other columns. And as I do that, you'll see that this new step is added here. Then I want to merge this with the product subcategory. So I'll just go and merge queries. You see this beautiful, nice diagram of showing what type of merge I'm going to choose. I'm choosing the second table, which is subcategory. I'm merging it based on product subcategory key in both places, and the default type of join is left outer join, clearly showing me that I will get everything from the first table and matching from the second table, but not non-matching from the second table. If I want to change that, I can choose different types of merge. I'll choose this, continue on that. That will give me the second table, again with this beautiful diagram now showing how this happens. So this is now sourcing from the product subcategory. I'll expand the merge and I'll get product subcategory name from here with product category key, because I want to use that later on to join with the product itself. Now this type of operation will create some kind of like special entity in Dataflow. We call it a computed entity. I'll talk about that later. For now, no need to worry about this type of entity. I'll disable the load of the other tables because I want to combine them in one table at the end, which is the product. So waiting for this refresh to finish. Ideally, you just process this much faster than this, and you can also, of course, do it in Power Query in Power BI Desktop and copy and paste that into here. While this is coming up, I'll show you also a way that we can copy and paste a Power Query script from Power BI Desktop in here. I have a script for creating a date dimension. I'm going to use that and come in here, build another query. So I'll create a new query, a blank query this time, and I'll paste that query. So this is how easy you can actually copy and paste from Power BI Desktop into here. And then I can call this one a date dimension. And you can see again, this is really nice diagram showing all the different processes happening over here. And this is my date table. Back to my product table, I just do one more merge. And this time I'll do that with product category based on the category key here and the category key here. And this time I will have also the product category information and expanding that into getting the product category name, English product category name. So quite simple to do these transformations. I haven't wrote any single line of code because I'm using the powerful engine of Power Query data transformation here. I remove unnecessary columns. So I have a product table with name, category name, subcategory name. If I scroll down, you'll see some names. These null values is that because there are like about 300 products without product category or subcategory. But if I scroll down, you'll see there are some others as well. And this nice diagram view actually shows me how this process happens. In fact, all of these steps, step by step, showed here, which is quite a nice way of analyzing this data. Once I have done whatever I want, I can save and close this Power Query entity with all of its entities. In this case, it's the product and date because the other two are not loading. Every data flow, you can consider it as like a little database. Now, this database includes just two tables. And whoever has access to that workspace and Dataflow would be able to use that Dataflow content. In this case, I will just share it with myself so that I can use it in another Power BI file. I'll go to Power BI Desktop just to show you that how this process can work out inside Power BI Desktop. In Power BI Desktop, you have the option to get data from Power BI Dataflows. This is one of the most common types of data sources available, or you can alternatively go and select it from more options, and then you should be able to select it under the Power Platform, Power BI Dataflows. When I connect to it, I'll have the option to see what workspaces I have a data flow in it. Of course, I need to log in first. And once I do the login, I'll see the workspaces with data flows in it. Now I have created some data flows previously. I can expand that and select the date table from that workspace. This is another workspace, of course, but similar to this. This is the date table. I'll just select and load it without rewriting that code. It is just that simple to use it. So Dataflow makes like an intermediate database situation for me here, which I can reuse it. I also wanted to show you that here, yeah, I can put a name for this data flow. Let's say Excel Virtually Global Data Flow. And once the data flow is saved, I can schedule it to refresh like a normal data set, or just refresh it. So these are actually how the data flow works in principle. Now let's go back to our slides, which I'll talk about some other specific data flow features. One of the things is that data flow is not just for Power BI, it is also available for Power Platform as well. So in fact, we have like two types of it: Power BI data flows, Power Platform data flows. In fact, they are all Power Query data flows. But if you want to like call it by a name, it can be like, yeah, some data flows can be created in Power BI, some in Power Platform, and some in other places as well. They can be created exactly in a similar ways. There are some differences between these. For example, the refresh schedule or type of entities that can be created are slightly different, but in principles, in terms of data transformations, you'll get the same outcome. Data flows has types of entities, tables, let's say, which can be in three types: standard entity, like a normal table, linked entity, and computed entity. Linked entity and computed entity are premium only features of data flow. A computed entity is generated when you reference an entity from another entity, like when you have seen in my example, the DIM product that I created, that was referencing from product category and product subcategory because of that merge. Now, if I want the product category and subcategory also to be loaded, in this case they are not loaded, then DIM product would be a computed entity because it is getting data referenced from another query which is already loading. So that is a computed entity. Linked entity is another type of entity which is created in another data flow but linked inside this data flow. These two types of entities are premium features which for refreshing them and working with them, you'll need a specific licensing, which is premium, especially for computed entity, because it comes with a specific enhancement in the engine that will make the processing of your query much faster, called enhanced compute engine behind the scene as well. Dataflow also split into two types in another term called analytical and standard data flows. The data flow that you create in Power BI normally is analytical data flow. It stores the data inside Azure Data Lake storage. It can be used for AI integration, such as calling some cognitive services and features like that. These are things that you may have seen when I created that data flow. There is a section for AI insights. These specific features are for analytical data flow, and computed entity is also for analytical data flow. Standard data flow, on the other hand side, only stores the data inside Dataverse, or what it was called as Common Data Services previously. It can be created in Power Apps portal. It can be created in Power Apps. Doesn't mean that it is also can be created in Power BI, because when you create it in Power BI, it automatically stores the data in Azure Data Lake, so it becomes analytical. So if you want to create a standard data flows, you have to go and create Power Platform data flows inside Power Apps portal, for example. There are two major versions for that as well. This type of entity doesn't give you the ability of doing AI integration, and there are some other differences for that as well. But the main two things that you'll miss in standard data flows is that you don't have AI functionality for that, and you don't have computed entity, and of course it doesn't require premium licensing as well, but you'll need to have Dataverse or Power Apps license instead, which might end up being cheaper than premium. Depends on what type of premium you are using. Premium per user, perhaps not that much. Dataflow also stores data in two different types of storage at the moment. One is Dataverse, Common Data Services, the old name for that. The new name is Dataverse. Another is Azure Data Lake Storage, like what you have seen. The Power BI Dataflow I created, that behind the scene write data into Azure Data Lake Storage, but I don't see that storage. If I want to go and see that storage separately, I don't have the ability to do so. It is only for Power BI. It is not for me to use. If I want to use that storage and have another application, let's say a .NET application, any other applications to read data from the result of that data flow inside Azure Data Lake Storage, then it is better that I have my own Azure Data Lake subscription, because I can connect to it. It's not just for Power BI. It's called external data flows. The structure of Dataflow storage inside Data Lake is like this. You'll have a folder for each workspace, of course. Under that, you'll have a folder for each data flow. Under that, you'll have a folder for each entity, which the data of that entity is stored as a CSV file. Multiple CSV files, depends on the size of data. And there is also a file called model.json. This is a metadata file of your data flow. This is quite helpful file, in fact, if you want to migrate your data flow from one workspace to another workspace, move it, or do something like copying it. That JSON file is quite helpful. You can actually create that JSON file by going to your data flow. Let's say in any of these data flows, I don't know what I called this last one. I think I called it Excel Virtually Global. Yeah, here it is. And then I can export the JSON file. This is the metadata file. I can then use this file, and when I create a new data flow, let's say in another workspace, I can say I'm going to import model, and I choose that file. So this is more like a way of creating backup and restore, but not including the data. You still need to process the data, refresh the data set to get the data. It is just for now to produce that model again. So in fact, that common data model storage includes the data files, CSV files, and that model.json file, which means that if you use your own storage, you are able to connect to these using any other applications you want. If you want to use your own storage, of course, you need your own Azure subscription account for that. Now, some of the best practices if you are using Dataflows can be, like, we can talk about it for days. It is quite extensive subject. I have written about 14 articles in Microsoft documentation about Dataflows. I encourage you to go and read them. And also many articles in Redicat as well. Some of the best practices of using Dataflows. First of all is that try to work with computed entity whenever is possible. For example, imagine this scenario. Let's say I have two queries producing data from the data source after some transformations. Now, these two queries might have some parts of their transformation common, such as getting data from this particular table, doing some transformations. Then from that point onward, they take different routes, and one of them do some specific transformation, another doing another transformation. This type of situation is ideal for using a computed entity. What you can do is that you can do the common transformation using a computed entity. It stores the data in Azure Data Lake Storage, And then the other two queries get data from that. The computed entity is stored as an actual entity, and that makes all the difference. It processed once, and then these queries are processed from the result of that. Instead of processing again from the source, they are doing only part of the processing, which will make the whole process faster. And something such as enhanced compute engine in Power BI Dataflows would help a lot in making that performance faster as well. Another important thing is breaking your data flows into multiple data flows. Of course, you can do all the transformation in one data flow, but separating that as a layer will help you whenever you want to substitute that layer or part of that layer with something else. Let's say, for example, you are getting data from the data source, you do some data transformations in the data flow, and then you load that into an entity. The result goes to the data set. But if, for example, that data source changes, for example, it was SQL Server, now the server is deprecated, you are using a new version of SQL Server, you are using Oracle, let's say, for example. This means that you have to go to all of your data flow entities and change the connections, perhaps change some of the transformations as well. But if you create like layers of data flow, for example, one layer for staging data flows, which just get data from the data source as is, no data conversion, no data transformations, just load it as some entities in the data flow. And then another set of data flows called transformation data flows, which get data from those entities and do the transformation. If you have this separation of layers, then if the data source changes, you'll just change your staging data flows connections. The transformation data flows would be intact. It makes your maintenance much easier. Another best practice example of data flow is to use it for slow data sources. Sometimes a data source is slow. It might be because of, let's say, it has to pass through a quite busy gateway. It might be, let's say, an ODBC connector, which is very slow. If you have data flows reading data from that, each of them creating connection, this is a slow. But if you have one data flow as a data ingestion data flow, it populates the data in there, and then other data flows gets data from that ingestion data flow, that would make it much faster. It's like a remedy for a slow data source. You'll make it much faster with just doing one ingestion from there. Data flow can be used for data source isolation as well, and that by itself is like one of the examples was that staging data flows I explained. About all of these, I have multiple articles. Go and check it on my blog as well. Data source isolation example can be like this, that I can have multiple Power BI data sets that they are connecting to a database, and this database might have millions and billions of rows, multiple tables, huge database tables. Which I might not need all of that. What I can do instead is I can have the data of that database, only part of that data, like aggregated, filtered, loaded into Azure Data Lake Storage using Dataflows, of course, and then Power BI reads it from there. So I actually isolated the Power BI dataset from the data source using this layer of data flow, which will make it much easier for people to use. This is also helpful for reducing the amount of read transaction from the source system. Normally DBAs, database administrators, are not much fan of having, let's say, 10 data sets connecting and getting their data from one single data source, especially at peak times. This might be quite a problem for the performance of that data source, versus if we have the data of that loaded into a data flow, then that data source can continue work with the operational system. Power BI datasets are reading their data from the Dataflow storage. Another example is that in the dataset, you'll have to define a lot of levels of data source access management system for each of these Power BI datasets. But if you load that into the Dataflow, then Dataflow can control that. It actually isolates it from the source, so that source doesn't really need to care about who are using it. This is all happening inside Dataflow. Dataflow actually becomes like kind of your data warehouse handling this. One of the very common architectures of using Dataflow is combining it with a data set, like a 3-layer architecture that I explain about that normally in many of my sessions and books. Is that Dataflow can connect to data source, multiple data sources, get data, store it in Azure Data Lake Storage. Then the Power BI data set gets data from the Dataflow and build different data marts, one for sales, one for purchasing. They might use common tables, which is absolutely fine. And then you'll have Power BI reports, get data from dataset connecting to that. You'll have one layer for visualization, one layer for modeling, one layer for data flow and data transformation. The beauty of this is that, of course, you can have multiple people with different skills working on different layers. The person who is good at data flows and Power Queries and data transformations and M can work in this layer. The person who is good at doing data modeling and DAX can work at the modeling layer, and the person who is good at visualization can do the visualization. And this layer also means that you can easily replace one layer with something else. If your visualization comes from Excel, this can be replaced by Excel. If the data model is built in Azure Analysis Services, this can be replaced by that. If data flow, instead of data flow, you want to use something such as wrangling data flows in Azure Data Factory, you can replace it with that. Easily, it is possible to swap it with another layer. And the last thing I want to mention is the access to the data flows. When you create data flows, how you create them? Do you create like one data flow including all entities, or do you create data flows in different places? Data flows are shared through workspaces. Let's say if I create data flow entities such as date, time, currency, and I want to share it with sales report or HR report, one way is that I put that in a workspace. I call it a generic data flow workspace, or whatever you might call it. I'll give access to this workspace to the Power BI developers from sales report and HR reports. They will be able to get data from these and continue building their reports, and their users will see the data. The end user doesn't need to have access to this data flow itself. The Power BI developer in these workspaces, however, need to have access to these data flows. This is not necessarily just one workspace. This can be multiple workspaces, because sometimes tables such as date, time, currency is something you use in all workspaces, but an account related table perhaps used only in 2-3 other workspaces. So you might have like a hierarchical design of these, that these data flows are in a workspace shared with everybody, but these workspaces are for account specific, which might be for sales workspace, accounting workspace, having access to that. You control access to the data flow using the access to the workspace and controlling all around it, not for end users, of course. This is all for the developer. And then one last thing, considering this is Excel Virtually Global Conference, is that Power BI Dataflows is not just for Power BI or Power Platform. It is coming also for Excel. So in the future, in Excel, you'll be able to get data from Power BI Dataflow, which means that that's table you have built, it's not just for Excel. You can use it, it's not just for Power BI, you can use it in Excel, you can use it in any other places. That is still work in progress. Stay tuned for that. Thank you again for watching my session. All of the information I shared with you, there are articles about it in Microsoft documentation website that I have written, and also the Radicat website. I have a lot of articles and videos about data flows. If you are interested to chat more about it, I'm available online. Let me know if you have any questions, and thank you for watching.